Ile naходится, что у тебя сейчас работает? Какой транспорт маршрут? Чуть правее сзади, красная точка. Ну, ты там, конечно, ну, забавно.
zabezpiecz swoje mieszkanie fantastycznymi ofertami z JISK. 10% dodatku.
Thank you very much,
Mi
Mr.
país
President.
agradece la presencia y el
My
llamado
country
del
is grateful
secretario
for the
general en esta
presence
sala,
and the call of
mismo
the
que
Secretary
respaldamos.
General
Agradecemos también la
in this
actualización que
chamber,
presentó la subsecretaria Di Carlo.
and we thank him for being
México
here. We
lamenta que
also
a pesar
thank
del
Mr.
llamado
Carlo for her
generalizado de la
briefing.
comunidad internacional,
Mexico deplores
las
the fact that
tensiones
despite
alrededor de Ucrania, en lugar de haber
widespread calls from the
disminuido, han
international
aumentado.
community,
Es por ello que
tensions
esta
around
noche nos
Ukraine,
vemos
instead of
obligados a
having
reunirnos
decreased, have
nuevamente aquí.
increased. For this
Todos los
reason, we
estados,
see
al haber
ourselves
ratificado la Carta de las
obliged to meet
Naciones
once
Unidas,
again in
nos
this
comprometemos.
chamber.
From both sides, and it is a matter of concern. 40 soldiers, 40 Ukrainian soldiers, more than 40 Ukrainian soldiers, around 10 civilians killed, sir. It's a full-blown war now, if one has to believe these numbers. Dr. General Kulkarni.
Yes, definitely. The reason is, even from
To naturze zawdzięczamy naszą
all the means, weapons, financial support to Ukrainian economy, humanitarian aid and support.
के ऊपर उन्होंने रशियन
Więc
Tutaj jest informacja
możemy-
a propos tego, jakie są póki
ja
co...
tylko chciałem pogratulować.
No więc jeszcze nie, ale zaczynamy bardzo niedługo naszą serię spotkań, żeby było jasne.
Give its freedom, whatever they think in Moscow. For the Ukrainians, our independence and the right to live in our land in accordance with our will. Russia cowardly attacked our country early in the morning, very much like the Nazi Germany did during the Second World War. As of today, our countries are on the different side of the world divide. Russian Federation is on the evil side, but a lot depends on the Russian people. The citizens of Russia will be choosing which path they are personally.
Senior Moscow analyst Alexander Brzezinski is also with us live from Moscow. Alexander, Ukrainian president announcing the the cutting off of diplomatic ties with Russia, probably inevitable, given the circumstances. But what is your assessment of the current crisis, Alexander? Where do you see it headed now?
Well, actually, the current crisis is actually seen as a plain invasion by the Russian side. Although I would agree with my colleague from Russia that Ukrainian side has for years has neglected Donbass, and President Poroshenko, when he was a commander-in-chief, actually bombed Donbass people, and a lot of them been killed. However, Russia supplied and helped the separatist region with the military aid, and somehow the fighting was, less. And then now it's actually seen the last Putin attempt to kind of like conquer the whole Ukraine. But that looks like his own political decision. We have seen the Security Council meeting where everybody just noted in agreement. Well, I see Russia, I would compare Russia now to the United States as it acted against Yugoslavia in 1999. Then United States, without any agreement from UN, has attacked Yugoslavia, an independent country. So that's actually reminds me of that situation.
Do you see this? Do you see the hostilities escalating now, Alexander? Tatiana says it's too early to call. It'll be interesting to see how NATO countries react now, because all this while until the first shots were fired, many NATO countries, the United States, were saying that if shots are fired, if combat actually begins, then Russia will face the consequences. What are these countries expected to do now?
Well, I would agree with a colleague. It's actually not that you don't have boots on the ground. There may be some Russian military in the eastern side, because the eastern side claims that some of the Ukrainian forces are actually claiming for humanitarian corridor and wants to surrender. And this is the only possibility. So what Putin is expecting, I don't think so. He's expecting a large-scale war. So probably he wants to do this operation for a couple of days, and then to force President Zelensky and his surroundings to negotiate, maybe with the help of some other sides. Let's say people like senior people in the world, like Prime Minister Modi, for example, or the UN people, because I don't think so the West would be the mediator as it was during the Georgia-Russian conflict. So for Putin, of course, it's not to force the whole Ukraine under his hands, although that might be his political goal, but to force Ukraine into neutrality and not to join NATO. Maybe this will be achieved, but Russia will still face very hard sanctions from the West. That's unfortunately.
Absolutely. And, that's what I wanted to ask. The sanctions are already high. There are more sanctions in the barrel that could be flowing out, depending on what happens. Tatiana, to you, what is the end? I know this is a difficult question because this is such a developing situation. It could, there are many different ways it could actually go. But the end game for President Putin is for NATO to be off the table as far as Ukraine is concerned, and for these hostilities to actually end. Is there a clear path towards that, given what we're seeing right now?
Well, that's unfortunately that only time will tell, because of course the end game for Russia has been very clear for all this time. We've spoken about red lines. We've spoken about the fact that there are still, to this day, yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, the US has actually ordered the pullout of military advisors that they had on the ground in Ukraine. That's right. And, even the sole presence of those military advisors, that was completely unacceptable, because not only does it contradict the Ukrainian constitution, but generally that sends a very, very disturbing message here to Russia, because, we have military advisors on the ground in Ukraine. We have NATO spreading eastward, spreading without a stop, and they don't make it even, they don't make a single sign of the fact that they're not willing to go even closer to our border. And the president has already reiterated it multiple times. It's completely unacceptable from our Western partners. The same, it would have been the same if, for instance, Russia was trying to spread bases and to set up a camp outside the American border. I do believe that would be disturbing for Washington, D.C. However, unfortunately, the double standards that Washington applies to everybody else apart from, their own interests is still in place. And Russia has made it abundantly clear this is completely unacceptable. Unfortunately, we have to wait and see whether our Western partners actually get the message this time around that we're not joking around. We don't like a military threat outside of our borders. We already have an immense number of NATO troops outside our borders in Poland, in Baltic countries. And this is enough, you know.
Okay, this is Russia saying enough is enough. I want to get a quick word. Thanks very much, Tatiana and Alexander, for being with me. Very valuable to get your assessment from Moscow as well, because we, already there's a lot of misinformation. So getting a well-rounded perspective from all sides is crucial to us here on India Today. Rajesh, you just heard the voices from Moscow. They're saying that these are standoff strikes. Precisely what you were also saying, that, there don't appear to be boots on the ground or tanks crossing the border. That could be misinformation, but standoff attacks are taking place with missiles and aircraft.
I totally agree with you. They were standoff attacks.
Yeah.
I was here in the morning when Mariupol airport was attacked. We did not hear any aircraft, no noises. It was a precision attack on the Mariupol airport in the morning, like in Odessa or on the other airports in Ukraine. Russia has not hit any civilian target as far as my knowledge is concerned. And as I've been saying since morning, there are no boots on the ground.
Yeah.
No tanks are rolling inside Ukraine as of now, as has been reported by probably other channels or some other Indian media. There are no tanks rolling inside and no boots on the ground, only precision airstrikes at the airports to make sure that Ukrainian air defense is knocked out. And what your lady correspondent spoke from Moscow, I more or less agree with her that when Ukraine was bombing Donbass, killing civilians over there, there was no ripples in the West. There were no statements from any politicians in the West.
Yeah.
And now suddenly they've woken up to the fact that these people actually want their independence and do not want to stay with Ukraine anymore. And one more last point I would like to say.
Yes.
This war is, as I said earlier, is not just about military strikes. This is a hybrid warfare, and it is also a warfare of perceptions and misinformation. Both the countries, Ukraine, if you see the statement of President Zelensky today and of Mr. Putin in the morning, is exactly the same. It's also a war for the hearts of the people.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people on both sides believe they are same people. They're Slavic people, same culture, same history, same language. They do not want to fight.
Absolutely.
90% people I have met in Ukraine or in Russia before think they're brothers, and it's only America which wants to see them fight. And this is a war by both the presidents to address the public in both the countries to make sure that they understand the point. And Putin, believe me, hopes that probably half of the Ukrainian army will lay down arms and will not fight against the Russians.
Rajesh, your perspective is so valuable right now because you're calling a spade a spade. We're not going to buy into the disinformation, misinformation, propaganda on either side. There are double standards and hypocrisies in the West, in Ukraine, in Russia, all across. So we have to take everything with a pinch of salt when covering conflict, and that's why we have the best team on the ground. Rajesh, Maria, Gaurav are in Ukraine covering this story very sensitively, putting themselves in harm's way in eastern Ukraine to bring us the real story. And we will not believe anything that is thrown at us. We will analyze it for you so you know the truth, because you are owed the truth here on India Today. This is real war reporting, not some fancy graphics that other channels put on air to try and tempt and titillate the viewer. This is conflict. It has to be taken seriously, and we will do nothing but that. Very quick break. Not taking our gaze away from this story. Please stay with us here on India Today.
Watching India Today.
This is Ukraine's true danger zone. This is where gun firing and artillery firing has begun. After a perilous 14-hour train journey from Kiev, India Today reports from the real war zone. Only channel in the rebel combat zone.
Barricades that have been set up, and beyond those barricades is the deployment of the Russian army.
Up close and fearless in Ukraine's combat zone.
be no territorial integrity of any UN member state, and that equally applies to Ukraine. So that was an interesting statement by the Chinese, because on the other hand, Wang Yi had been heavily critical of the United States in his statement to the Munich Security Conference. He began essentially with a tirade accusing the United States of trying to drum up a new Cold War, of trying to divide the world. And also, and we've heard this a few times from the Chinese, essentially saying that they support Russia's concerns over security in Europe, that they oppose expansion of the NATO alliance that we've just been talking about. So on the one hand, you have the Chinese giving these signals of support to the Russians on it has legitimate security concerns. It is right to say that NATO should not expand, that China as well as Russia sees NATO as a kind of Cold War relic. But on the other hand, saying that they are committed to the territorial integrity of all states and that that applies to Ukraine. So will this become a problem for Vladimir Putin? Well, Putin, of course, has been establishing pretexts for what he's doing here. He has been arguing that there is genocide taking place in eastern Ukraine, something for which there is no evidence. He has been arguing that there is a fascist, I think he said, a fascist junta in place in Kiev, and that this junta supposedly needs to be replaced. So he is trying to establish legitimacy for his military action. And it will be what we need to watch on the Chinese side is, do they accept these arguments? Do they stand by him? Or does his action start to become so flagrant in Ukraine that that becomes almost an impossibility? Now, you shouldn't expect China suddenly to jump over and say, we're friends with America now, we're on NATO's side, anything like that. No. But if China starts to withdraw backing in any kind of diplomatic signals, then that is bound to affect Vladimir Putin's calculations.
We're waiting at the moment to hear from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Germany's position. Can you tell us a bit more about what you expect from Europe's largest economy?
Yeah, well, I think Olaf Scholz, there's been a lot of criticism of Olaf Scholz in recent weeks, leading up essentially to pretty much to this week, about being not outspoken enough on the crisis, of not explicitly saying that he would target the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, this very controversial gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, where there are strong demands that that be sanctioned if Russia went ahead with further escalation. So a lot of criticism within Germany, but also internationally, of Olaf Scholz of like, is he really stepping up to the plate as this crisis required? And I think this has turned around this week with his announcement that he is stopping the current certification process for this pipeline, because the pipeline has been built, but it hasn't come into operation yet, saying that we have an entirely new geopolitical situation now with Russia recognizing those eastern Ukrainian separatist regions. And saying that they have to completely rethink their approach to energy security and whether this pipeline has any place in that. And the signals coming from Scholz in interviews after that being, don't hold your breath for this to come out in favor of Nord Stream 2. So kind of between the lines implying that the whole thing is completely dead. That won a lot of plaudits from other members of the Western Alliance. And I think that will kind of burnish his reputation as somebody who maybe kind of talks softly at first, but then actually acts. And obviously there's going to be a lot of focus now on what he says now. But we've already had a taste of that. There was a statement overnight. So you can expect very strong solidarity with Ukrainians and pushing for strong sanctions. But we'll only find out tonight at the European summit, I think, exactly what sanctions the Europeans are going to be moving ahead with, how far they're ready to go. But I think you can expect a strong message from Scholz. I think it's very clear that he has no illusions now about what's going on.
What about the question of weapons and Germany supplying weapons to Ukraine? I mean, it's not like Germany's not a big exporter of weapons.
Yeah. Germany is a large exporter of weapons, one of the largest in the world, but it does have strict guidelines and strict rules about where it can export weapons to, and says that it holds very strongly to rules on not sending weapons into a conflict, an active conflict zone. It has worked around those rules in the past, for instance, supplying weapons to the Peshmerga rebels in Iraq. But the German position has been, there have been various elements to it. On the one hand, it's been stressing that it has, you know, a historical responsibility emanating from its responsibility for the Second World War, which is the backdrop to this very restrictive approach to exporting weapons. Although that is double-edged because its responsibility is partly to Russia, but it's also to Ukraine. Both countries were, of course, suffered incredible losses in the Second World War. That's one element. Another element is that Germany has been part of what's called the Normandy process, so a dialogue, diplomatic dialogue, aimed at resolving the issues in eastern Ukraine. And that dialogue includes Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine.
We're looking at live pictures there from Ukraine, Russia having launched an invasion of the country this morning. We had announcements from the Russian President Putin at 6 a.m. this morning to address the situation. We've also heard from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky having addressed citizens at home and abroad, asking people not to panic and calling on them to support Ukraine's armed forces. Let's listen into that.
My dear Ukrainians, just like I promised, I am again talking to you. I will provide you with updated and verified information every hour. Now we are attacked by bombs as well as fakes. It is important to receive truth from the official sources. Today, Russia started an invasion of Ukraine. Putin started a war against Ukraine, against the whole democratic world. He wants to destroy my country. He wants to destroy our country, everything we have been building, what we live for. I address all Ukrainians, and primarily Ukrainian servicemen, who have already taken the first enemy's strike and are repelling it with dignity. We are aware of the Ukrainian armed forces' strength. You are courageous. You are unbroken. You are Ukrainian.
The Ukrainian President Zelensky there talking about the fact that his country and his people are at stake at this hour. An interesting address because it was taken on his mobile phone. Richard, could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think fascinating to see that simple fact that this is evidently recorded at his desk on a phone, and it recalled for me the coup attempt against Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey a number of years ago now, when Erdogan also posted a defiant message recorded in vertical on his mobile phone. Erdogan survived that coup. It's questionable whether Zelensky is going to be able to remain in office, given what is happening, given this invasion. Of course, he's putting out there a message of resilience and trying to avoid any sense of panic that would then spread to his population. And it is quite remarkable, the sort of resilience that he's been able to show so far. We should remember that Zelensky, he's not a professional politician.
Postaw na swój rozwój, dołącz do Kapita w Opolu i zarabiaj więcej. Dołącz do najlepszych, dołącz do Kapita.
From a completely different walk of life. He's in his early 40s. He's also a young man, showing quite remarkable resilience under pressure there. But his position is very, very weak, and he must be aware that there's a strong likelihood that he's not going to be in office for much longer. That Vladimir Putin has really explicitly said that he wants to remove the Ukrainian government from office.
But why the mobile phone? I mean, is it to show immediacy, some sort of personal touch, or the fact that he couldn't get to a TV studio or get a camera in? The urgency of the situation, I guess.
Of course, we can only speculate about that, but it is not something that he would do in a normal situation, that's for sure.
Richard, what else can you tell us about what we could expect in the next hours, the next days, as far as this developing news goes on the invasion of Ukraine by Russia?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a real diplomatic push, but this is not a diplomatic push between Ukraine and Russia, or between the West and Russia. Any talk of contacts on those levels have been broken off for now. There was due to be a meeting between Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, today here in Europe. That got cancelled even after the Russians recognized the breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. There had also been talk in some frantic diplomacy by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, on Sunday and into the night into Monday, trying to queue up a summit meeting between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. It's clear that's not happening right now. It's clear that Russia has opted for military action, for violence, rather than diplomacy at this stage. So the diplomacy is now happening on other fronts. So we're going to have meetings, an emergency meeting of NATO this morning, so that's based in Brussels. Also in Brussels then later tonight, there's going to be a European summit, which is also on an emergency basis. And then during the course of the day, there will also be a G7 summit by video conference, which of course then includes the larger European countries plus the Americans and the Japanese. So a huge amount of diplomacy going on among allies at this point, but not across the divide to the Russians.
How do you re-establish those lines in a situation like this?
Yeah, it's hard to say how long it's going to take. Of course, people will have to talk again. That will at some point happen. About this immediate crisis and also about wider issues of security. We're entering a new era at this point. There's been a lot of talk recently in the recent years about the threat of a...
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Richard Walker.
Ladies
German
and
Chancellor
gentlemen,
Olaf Scholz is now addressing the
This
nation.
24th of February is a terrible day for Ukraine and a very dark day for Europe. In attacking Ukraine, Russian President Putin is blatantly infringing on international law. Putin is bringing suffering over Ukraine, his direct neighbor. He's infringing on the borders of Ukraine. He's endangering the lives of countless innocent people in Ukraine, the brother country of Russia. And in doing so, he is questioning the peace structure of our entire continent. There is no justification for any of this. This is Putin's war. I said to Ukrainian President Zelensky in a phone call today that in these dark hours, Ukraine and its citizens have our full solidarity. In view of the current developments this morning, I have convened the Security Cabinet so that the government can debate on the situation and make decisions about how to proceed from here together. All German citizens in Ukraine, I would like to ask most urgently to leave Ukraine for their own safety. The President of the German Bundestag, I have asked to convene a special meeting of the Parliament where I will give a special state address. As head of the G7 this afternoon, I will be convening a meeting of the G7 as a video conference looking for a clear, coordinated response to the situation. We will be coordinating closely with our international partners in NATO and in the European Union today in order to place further severe sanctions against Russia now. And it is good that we have prepared for this eventuality carefully. The aim of our sanctions is to make it clear to the Russian leadership that they will pay a bitter price for this aggression. It remains to be seen, but it will be clear that Putin has made a terrible mistake by unleashing this war. Let me address a word to our NATO partners in Poland, the Baltic states, Romania. Let me assure you that we understand your concerns in the light of these developments all too well, and we will support you. Germany is committed to the Mutual Defense Clause of NATO. Together with the French president, I would suggest that the heads of state and government of the NATO countries meet in presence to debate the situation. This evening, I will be traveling to Brussels within the EU heads of state and government, we will be debating the situation, which is, as we know, very serious. I would like to call on Russian President Putin to stop his military attack now, to stop the bloodshed, and to withdraw his troops from Ukrainian territory completely. Thank you.
Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, there pleading with Putin to stop the bloodshed and withdraw his troops, also promising more sanctions that will be aimed at hurting Russia, saying that Russia would pay a bitter price for what it has done for invading Ukraine. Let's go over now to DW's chief political editor, Michaela Köfner, who's joining us from outside the Chancellery. What was Scholz's central message there?
Well, the central message was that there is no excuse for this. That's what he said, literally clearly addressing this to Vladimir Putin, to Russia. And now there will be a quick succession of meetings. The G7 will talk virtually this afternoon. There's a special EU top summit coming, a special session of the German Parliament on Sunday, where Olaf Scholz will hold a speech. So many words, and the actions we will learn through the course of the day, what that full package of sanctions will entail, as the German Foreign Minister put it earlier today. A very stern reaction is now expected, and this comes just over a week after Olaf Scholz himself traveled to Moscow. I was with him on that trip, got the chance to ask Vladimir Putin whether he will decide whether there will be a war, yes or no. And he said, of course, Russia does not want a war on European soil. Well, it appears that those plans were already made. Potentially that decision was already made up for Vladimir Putin, for Russia to launch this invasion, which clearly is aimed, he says, at demilitarizing Ukraine. But really what it means is changing the government into something more palatable for Russia, and a very serious situation. That's what Olaf Scholz said, underlining what a serious state of affairs we have at this historic day today.
Scholz also said there that he spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky, offering his full solidarity from Germany. What does that mean?
Well, it means most of all political solidarity. After all, Germany, the EU, the United States is willing to implement these sanctions, which are hurting both sides. And this is also German leaders here preparing the German public that this will hurt financially, economically. What it does not mean, in the German case, is providing weapons, but that debate is flaring up here again in Berlin, whether Germany shouldn't provide weapons after all. And it doesn't mean more than also economic solidarity. NATO, that's what we heard from Olaf Scholz again, NATO will stick by defending all of its members, clearly meaning the Baltic states here, who are very concerned, who've been warning that this could happen for a very long time. And Volodymyr Zelensky, when last weekend he was at the Munich Security Conference, where also he spoke to Olaf Scholz, he really held an impassioned speech asking for security guarantees, translating into a prospect of joining NATO. Well, he is not getting that, and that's where Ukraine is left alone at this moment in time to do the fighting that Russia is now inflicting on it.
As far as security goes, Scholz there called on all Germans to leave Ukraine immediately. He also mentioned that the German